back for the second round. This time they're on 2 tables, so you know you have to look on the left or the right. Also, I'm not going to run any music. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. Yeah, let's go. We got a 4-bet pot. Of the times you 3-bet the Jack-9 suited, you always call the 4-bet. So that is what Fedor's going to do. Maybe I'll speed it up a little bit. But yeah, he flops top 2. You could donk 5% range as Fedor. Victor should be c-betting his quarter pot sizing, 55% of his range, which is including 70% of his kings. But yeah, what we're going to see here that's interesting is Fedor is going to invent a bet size, and he does that. And I think tournament players do this in general because they try to think, what's a good bet size for, you know, this spot? But the problem with that thought is this spot equals this hand. So you'll see Limitless later in the match making an exploitative fold that's correct this time, unlike his ace-9 fold from the first match. And it's kind of based on this, like, Fedor just inventing a bet size, and it's not based on his range, it's based on his hand. And so that's a risk of doing something like that. And you definitely see it more from tournament players than cash players, because cash players are thinking, okay, well, if I did this, what would I do with all of the other hands? And what other hands would I do that with? And what would be my bluffs? Whereas tourney players think, you know, oh, I can just do this. Or I don't know. That's at least what strikes me. That's an oversimplification. Obviously, Fedor's not a bad player, but I think this inventing bet sizes does lead to imbalanced actions. Anyway, Victor should always jam against this random sizing that's never used. And yeah, I'll do my best not to spoil the runs in case you guys haven't seen the hands. I'll do my best to keep this in chronological order, but we did miss this hand. Victor's going to c-bet here, 30% pot, get called by Fedor. Not a super interesting one, I just thought it was worth including. I think everything's worth including though, really, so. But yeah, Victor checks a correct decision after his c-bet, and Fedor's going to stab. His hand can do a mix of everything. 2 different sizes checking, they're the options I gave him, and his particular hand does all 3. But Victor's actually going to end up overfolding here, and it's not that intuitive that you'd want to continue like as many 7s as you're supposed to in Victor's shoes. He is folding 6-7, 7-4, and 7-3 that he 3-bets. But yeah, any reasonable kicker 7 is not getting folded. And I guess that's because your opponent's peeling you on the flop with a lot of king-queen. Some king-jack, even no backdoor. Yeah. Broadway floats, straight draws, bottom pairs, bluffing a little bit for the imposition. Left-hand side, Victor defending the queen-9 off. Flopping top pair, decent kicker. Yeah, this is a cool little hand. Fedor goes for a c-bet this time. His hand doesn't bet very often on this flop, even with the backdoor flush draw. Victor's hand never really raises. This turn is an interesting card. Victor can lead it, not with this hand, and not with much of his range, about 10%. And Fedor can mix some sizes here. His hand does find this bet size sometimes. Prefers to overbet, but mainly just gives up. Victor starts to find some folds on the turn too, but doesn't this time. And now this impressed me when I saw the result of this sim. Fedor finds a play on the river that his hand does pure, and it might not look that intuitive. Like you might be tempted even with a diamondless hand to find some large river bet, since your showdown with this is just total shit. But no, this is a good and yeah, good bet. And Victor can't call this without having queen-9 off at the diamond. And even then, it's only calling sometimes. Second 4-bet pot of the evening. This one, in theory, is really quite complicated. Victor makes a reasonably standard c-bet. Of the ace-5 offs you have, you do c-bet them more frequently with a club and about half the time without. So his hand's betting something like 75% of the time. Like as in ace of clubs 5. And Fedor, you might think, oh, you got the double gut, you got the backdoor flush. Maybe he wants to jam. Not really a thing here. It's interesting because, I mean, it's not hard for it to be a thing. But he does beat some hands, he has a lot of equity, and I think it's important for him to call this hand because on a lot of runouts, he's going to need to be able to hit it, like a king and an ace. Interestingly, he's actually in theory supposed to donk his hand quite often on the turn. And this would be Victor's response to that donk. So yeah, this hand, it definitely went down the more human route. But in Solverland, yeah, it's a really complicated spot. I think like nobody's playing this spot that well, at least nobody I know. Yeah, so Victor goes for the smaller bet, which his hand does almost always. You can have some shoves as the in position. I don't think people do that practically. I think people small bet only. Maybe if they had some random like combo draw that they like a jack 5 of clubs or something, maybe they would ram that intuitively. But yeah, most people don't ship in this spot in position. So Victor is going to find a bet, and then again another like kind of non-human players standard here, just jamming for value with the ace jack, denying equity from some of the kings that are betting the turn, some jacks and nines that are barreling, you know, to bluff in the future. Just denying equity. It's not something that you would expect to do with this hand in this spot. And finally, if Fedor does take this line, Victor is actually finding some folds with the ace-5. So yeah, it definitely, it doesn't look like a super complicated spot, but if you include like the turn donking and everything like that, yeah, it's definitely a tough one. As played on the river, Fedor never leads, and Victor can hero check sometimes. But is mainly shoving for the remaining 8.5k, and Fedor is obviously never folding. And that's what will happen in this spot. He will shove it. Fedor takes a while to call, but he calls. Single raise pot here on the left. Fedor going to go for the 30%er with the 9-5 double. Victor calls, which is standard, and the turn is where it will get interesting. Obviously, Victor doesn't lead. Now, Fedor, on these overcard turns, like you don't overbet them as often. His hand does find some overbets, but is mainly betting for a 75% pot size. He's going to overbet at this time. Victor does find a bunch of folds with the king 8, but it's about half the time. And if he has a diamond, he folds more. So without it, I think he continues. It was like 45% with this exact combo. So he's going to find a call. And I mean, the reason I put this one in is because I just figured it was a punt. So might as well highlight some of those. But it's also just an interesting spot that comes up pretty often, these type of spots. So if you know much about the state of the game, Nolan Maholden, it's kind of an obvious shove from Fedor. And in theory, he's supposed to mix some give-ups into that. But he's mainly jamming with the 9-5 off. Yeah. The other most used sizing is just like a 75% bet, where you get to bet a lot of your top pairs and stuff like that. Obviously, you have to make some strong hands too to protect the range, but with a hand like this, with no showdown, unblocking pair plus flush draw type of hands from your opponent, and blocking the nuts, yeah, it's just a ram mostly. But he chooses like this, what I was talking about in my last video, that like when in doubt, click pot. It could be a tell, I'm not really sure. But I was actually surprised to see that Victor's hand is always calling against the 75% pot bet, and mostly calling against the pot bet. So kind of an interesting hand, bit of a punt. Now at the same time on the other table, we have a hand where Victor's checked back ace-9 in a single raise pot as the preflop raiser. And he's going to find a turn bet. I gave him a few sizes, and this one's not really used, but maybe he always delays this sizing, or maybe he thinks that this sizing is just some kind of good exploit against his opponent. You can never be sure about these things as a spectator. But he goes ahead and uses this bet size, and Fedor should mainly check raise. Kings with a shit kicker. Almost always check raising them. Some do slow play, not king 6, but whatever. It's not much of a difference. And now this is where the hand is a bit strange, because Victor's overbetting range is kind of polarized to being trips as the weakest value hand. And bluffs, obviously. So when Fedor check raises, Victor's going to make a good fold, and I think the reasoning is that he knows that he's put this sort of merged value hand into his overbetting range. And because of that, his opponent's check raising range should be like very strong. And like the sizing is also interesting from Fedor. In theory, you're supposed to have like jams to fold off the chop and stuff, but anyway, let's not worry about that stuff too much. Yeah, basically Fedor's just gonna find a raise for value. Obviously, he's got like the super nuts, and Victor's gonna fold pretty quickly. So kind of a cool hand, like a little bit outside the box. But yeah, it seems like Victor knows what's going on in this spot pretty well. Left-hand side, Fedor 3-bet, C-bet, which he's pretty much always doing. Victor calls, which he's always doing. The turn's interesting. I gave a mix of sizes, like a third, a half, and a 75% bet. In general, Fedor is pretty much only using the larger sizing in this spot. However, his particular hand does like to bet third a decent amount. And sometimes even the larger size, but also checks a bit. So he checks this time. Victor checks back 100% of all ace queens, regardless of club. And that is what he'll do after a little deliberation. And then the river's quite a spicy card, the 9 of clubs. Fedor isn't supposed to value bet ace-6 at all. And what we might see here is actually quite a cool play. So he's going to go ahead and value bet this ace-6 here for a pretty healthy sizing. And Victor is going to bluff jam with the ace-queen high. In theory, he should actually bluff jam with queen of clubs ace, or fold. And with ace of clubs queen, he should call or fold. But since his opponent is value betting wider than he's supposed to be, like including this as a bluff seems pretty good as a response. And I'm not sure if he has this read on Fedor, that he might be value betting too wide on the river. But like Victor would have considered a call for sure too, but ends up settling on the jam. Maybe he just rolled it as well, because like, you know, as a human in game, you've got a hand that you could bluff if you roll high. It makes sense. But I mean, he's looked at a good number of sims. Like he probably knows that having the lower club is going to lead to being more aggressive in this spot. But he does shove. And after a bit of tanking, Fedor is going to give it a fold. On the right-hand table, single raise pot, Victor is going to go ahead and flat call c-bet here. King of spades 8. And the turn is a pretty big card. King bringing a second flush draw. Victor makes kings and eights. Checks to Fedor. Fedor can overbet this turn, but mainly bets 75% sizing. Does overbet this time, and facing overbet, this is one of the highest frequency raises of any hand that Victor will have. So I'm a little bit surprised not to see it get raised. But there are similar spots to this where like you almost never raise any hand in your range. You know, because if you start raising some of your value hands, it makes your range that continues with a call to the river a lot weaker. So you tend to want to protect that range with your stronger hands. But this hand is raised a lot, doesn't get raised this time. River is the 9 of diamonds. Fedor chooses a good sizing here. His hand, regardless of having a diamond, does mix this sizing. And Victor's hand never folds to the river bet. So on the right table, Victor 3-bet and c-bet. Fedor went for a standard call. And on the turn, Victor checks it.
Yo, shout out to KakiTee. I wanna talk to that kid, man. KakiTee goes way back. We go way back in the day, man. We were playing like full ring hold'em on stars back in the day, dude. Can't believe he's still kicking after it, getting after it. Seems like he's in pretty good spirits, and he's kind of memeing a lot, making a lot of jokes, says some things that piss some people off.
Yeah, some of that's true. I'll give the Joey a little buff for that one. But yeah, on turn, Fedor's going to find this larger stab sizing, and it's a pretty good play. Victor's going to call. He's supposed to fold a bit. And now we arrive on a brick river. Will Fedor go for the value jam, and should he? Yes, he should. Should Victor be calling this shove, and what do we think of the fact that he's about to call? He's mainly supposed to fold. Like he's mixing some low frequency calls with ace queen high without a spade. So I mean, he does choose a good combo to call with of the ace queens that he could. But he might have to read that Fedor doesn't value jam light enough in this spot, which would make a hand like this like much more of a call. Blocking some of the good value hands like ace jack and queen jack and shit like that. Unblocking some draws that Fedor might bluff, like, although he doesn't tend to bluff missed flush draws. Anyway, Victor snaps in pretty quick, and Fedor has given him a reason not to do so in the future by having a good merge. Single raise pot here on the left. Checked back on the flop from Victor, and Fedor has a king 5 open and mostly betting the turn for a couple of sizes. Does check sometimes. Victor's hand actually checks back mostly, but does use the size that he used for the times that he does bet it. So he's going to go ahead and bet 70% pot. Fedor now either raises or folds, in theory. But you can't really blame him. Like, king high is still some sort of bluff catcher. And, I mean, it's good in this situation. He's got his opponent beat, and his opponent's actually going to give up this river. And this is why I decided to check the spot out. I was just curious, like, is this an auto bluff or not? I imagine Victor's thinking he's got hands that have a heart that can bluff that are better than this. But this hand's like a pure 150% overbet if that size is an option. So this one it would be pretty funny for the players to see the showdown. Left-hand side, it'll 3-bet 6-7 suited. C-bets 30% on this flop. Victor with top pair and a flush draw can actually raise this hand like 60% of the time. Doesn't do it this time. This is where the hand sort of gets a little interesting. Fedor checks, which is completely standard, but Victor's going to check back. And a hand this strong just doesn't check back. Like even any jack-8's actually betting the turn for a smaller stab. But maybe Victor doesn't use small stab sizes and only bets larger, so it's a little more polarized when he bets, therefore checks this. But if you're using a mix of like 3rd and 75, this hand always bets 75 and the other jack-8's bet smaller mostly. But yeah, he's going to check it back, and it's because I guess he just wants to have some jacks like that he's checking back with, so his opponent can't just attack him with overbets on brick rivers, and also be able to hit a lot of flushes and not just checking back ace high flush draws or 9x flush draws. So kind of interesting turn spot. Then on the river, Fedor again makes a standard check, and Victor chooses a good sizing and is actually supposed to value bet almost all of his 9s and every jack or better for the sizing that he chooses. And Fedor is going to then be in a tough spot against this bet. What should he do with 6-7? What should he do with a 7 in general? And the key to this one is basically you just want to have hearts, because hearts block like all of the 2-pair combos, like the 7-9 and the queen 7. Spades are also better than clubs, like because they do have that blocking property, but now you block some of the other peels that he might have, like a6, king 6 of spades on the flop. So hearts are really the key to the hand. You continue with hearts and you fold the others. So not a big mistake by Fedor here, and just a kind of interesting hand, close spot for both on turn and river. Single raise pot, Victor defending the jack-8 on the left table with diamond. And yeah, this one was just a bit confusing to me in game, but Victor shows that he's a good player. So Fedor's going to go ahead and c-bet this hand, mostly checking. Victor goes for the call. This hand with diamond raises around 45% total. Doesn't do it this time. And on the turn, Fedor can mix sizes, 75 and overbet. This hand, I mean, it does use the 75 when it does bet, but it's betting like 8% total combos without a diamond king queen, because you've got so many other gut shot bluffs and less showdown value overcards in a straight draw type of thing. Yes, but he does bet. It does happen sometimes. And then Victor is going to go ahead and snap fold. And that just surprised me in game. But actually, the jack-8 with diamond is finding far more folds than any other jack-8 off combo, and you do have to fold a decent amount of them total facing that sizing. So yeah, cool little play there. Single raise pot on the right, and facing a 70% c-bet from Fedor, Victor is going to find a check raise with the queen of hearts 6. I had to node lock it in because apparently it's never a raise, but it's a pretty understandable hand to want to raise. 2 overs to the 4, 1 over to the 10. Backdoor high flush draw, backdoor straight draw with the 6. So I gave him 20% of Queen of Hearts X offsuit combos for the flop raise. Fedor's hand continues with a flat, pure pretty much. The turn is a good card for Victor's check raising range. And he bets this hand pure for the sizing that he chooses of 3 options that I gave, and he bets quite a lot of his range anyway. So he's going to find the turn barrel, and Fedor's hand is a pure call. The river is really why I ran the sim, because I was curious about his hand for the sizing that he took here. In theory, like if he had gone to the river with this hand and hand similar to it, it would be a pure jam. Like blocking straights and flushes is pretty nice, and obviously having just 0 showdown. But he decides to go for the 3rd bet, which a lot of hands in his range do want to do. And against the 3rd sizing, Fedor's hand is a pure fold, so it's a good fold by him. It's just an interesting choice from Victor. Like, you do want to have some shoves, and surely he knows that, but I guess he's thinking he's already got like the ace blocker and the king blocker. So with this queen, he might use it for something else. But I think the reason that it pretty much always shoves is just blocking the straight plus blocking the flush is just pretty amazing. So yeah, close and interesting hand. Okay, left-hand side, picking this hand up on the turn. Fedor made a standard c-bet on the flop with his hand, and Victor made a check call. And now Fedor's in a spot whether he is going to barrel the turn or not without a heart, open in a straight draw. And the answer is he should bet it about 30% of the time for the sizing he chooses, and he goes ahead and does it this time. Victor, you might think you might want to raise or anything like that, but all queen jack is calling the turn. Like, there's like 15% folds without a heart or something, but it's not much. And now on the river, should Fedor bluff? The answer is, yeah, he should always bluff with 9 high miss straight draw. But it's about the sizing. Should he choose the sizing that he chose or something bigger? And it's pretty simple, actually. If you have the heart, you go bigger. Without the heart, you use this sort of 75% sizing that he's gone for. So he plays his hand well. What should Victor do? He only has 2nd pair. Like, sure, he blocks some flushes, but his opponent's using a sizing that he would bet, you know, with a wide amount of value hands. He's not like he's just repping flushes and shit. So yeah, Victor, a little bit of a tough spot on the river 2nd pair. He is going to end up going for a call. And he should do that half the time when he has the queen of hearts, roughly. Every other queen jack is a fold. Right hand side table, Victor had 3-bet and check the flop, and Fedor Holz a check behind. As the 3-better, basically when you have these pocket pairs that are between the middle and the top card, the higher it is, the more you check it. So kings is like pure checking, whereas 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, these are betting more like half the time. Anyway, he checked the flop with the kings, checked the turn again, which is standard. Fedor can stab flop with ace-6, doesn't do it this time, and can bet turn. He can mix sizes, but this is the interesting part of the hand. When he chooses this sizing, he basically always has to bet the river. And maybe he knew this, but the fact that the river was the 4, you know, making any 3 a straight, might have thrown him off a little bit. And he's going to end up checking back what should be a pure value bet. If he had value bet, the sizing should be around 75% pot of the options I gave. Victor would never be able to fold the kings. Well, you know, practically he might, but in theory shouldn't. Right hand side table, Victor c-betting 30% pot. Fedor going to continue with his 2nd pair. And the turn gives Victor a flush draw on the 3. And he's actually supposed to bet all jack-6 of either flush draw for the largest sizing I listed as an option. So I no-locked him checking back 20% of a couple of jack-high flush draws. Not too important. It rewards him this time. He makes a flush, and his opponent is going to make a bet that's quite cool. I'd say a lot of players would miss this type of bet, but if you list it as an option, you want to do it with this hand almost every single time. So Fedor fires 480 into the 1600. I just gave Limitless 1 raise sizing on the river, so his range would be a bit more balanced, just to see if Fedor's hand or hands similar to it would ever want to call. They do not. If he does have the 9 of spades, he can like occasionally call, occasionally rebluff, since that blocks most of the flushes that his opponent's representing, since he should barrel all the other ones almost. But yeah, so Victor is going to go for a raise, and Fedor Holz is not going to fold.
This is a whale of a move by Morant there.
Right hand side table, Victor's 3-bet and C-bet, which is like a 95% range bet on this board for this sizing. Fedor's going to call. Turn 2 pair, 3 pair in this spot. And because Victor has almost a range bet on the flop, he has to almost range check a turn like this that changes the board so much. When he just doesn't have enough strong value hands to be betting. Even though like it looks like we have a good blocker and things like this, I had to node lock that he even bets this Ace of Hearts Jack at all. Pretty much never betting, but when betting using this sizing. So it's like at 8% of his range will bet with this size and 92% will check. Versus this raise, Fedor's hand is just a pure call. So he will end up going ahead and doing that. And then on the offsuit King River, strangely this hand's just giving up, even though it does look pretty reasonable to go for another barrel. Yeah, I mean, human-wise, like you can totally understand why he goes for the bet after he's bet the turn. I think the turn itself is kind of the complicated part of the hand, but it's pretty understandable for him to have won a bet, and it's pretty understandable considering that he's bet to now want to bluff the river, like, you know, blocking ace, queen, queen, jack, and flushes. He goes for a 70% sizing, knowing that his range has like a lot of hands that don't want to be just jamming. He doesn't want to polarize himself too much. He's going to just try and have a more balanced range, use this as a bluff, makes sense. Fedor's hand is a tricky one, because you know he's going to have a 7 a bunch, so how does having a 4 play with that? I think like he considered raising based on a comment that he made after the hand. And his hand would be a raise like 15% of the time if Victor had bet third pot on the river, which is also something Victor should be doing a decent amount in this spot. But against this larger sizing, Fedor just felt a bit uncomfortable, didn't want to like pay off, you know, some sort of thinner value bet, maybe like a king jack or something from Victor. Which I'd be surprised to see if that was a play he was going for, even with the king of hearts for this size. But yeah, Fedor ends up folding. In theory, his hand should always call. But what can you do? Tough spot.
I was balanced in this line, so I think your call or fold will be the MEV.
Yeah, I had a jam. I think that's.
Ooh.
But I wasn't sure.
Single raise pot on the left. Victor gonna check raise the 5 deuce with a backdoor flush draw. His hand does this most of the time that he doesn't donk. Victor gonna peel. He actually can 3-bet this hand funnily on the flop, but it's not very intuitive. Peels and turns a pair, and this is where the hand gets a bit strange. Victor's hand prefers to bet 75% pot or even an overbet, and doesn't really like this, what's a 31% sizing he ends up using. I think the reason that he decided to size this way is because he has a lot of strong value hands where his opponent will be drawing very thin with like just overs and a gutter, or one pair no gut shot, like an over pair, etc. And these hands can be in a lot of trouble against the strongest part of Victor's range. Also, Victor turns a pair of 8s pretty often, like after check raising gut shots and some like 8-9, 8-10 backdoors himself. So yeah, plus he wants to just value bet like some of the 7s that he check raises for small and control the pot. So I don't know, I think that's kind of the reasoning why he goes for the small sizing, but it's not really used so much. And definitely not with this hand. But the reason that I decided to run this one was because I felt Victor's decision on the river, similarly to when he played that deuce 3 of spades earlier, basically the flush is going to come in and he's going to choose not to bluff. Should we be doing these kind of plays? Like, I was curious because he did it twice. He's a good player. Like, I figured this is probably a bluff. You got the nut fucking low, but I wanted to know. And it is a bluff. You got the nut fucking low. But I think Victor, the way he constructs his range might be to have hands that have one heart that barrel the turn pretty frequently, and they're what he wants to be using on the river here. Because it was pretty similar to that deuce 3. He just gave the pot away. without too much thought, but it's also, that was a spot where he could have had the flush blocker on the river, and this is probably a spot he thinks he can also have a flush blocker, and therefore doesn't want to bluff this. But yeah, large bets are preferred over checking. Single raise pot on the right table. Victor's going to go for a c-bet. We didn't really see much out of him. This more like quarter pot c-bet on the jack high monotone board. And Fedor's going to find like a weird little raise. And this hand, this isn't the only bet size he's going to invent. So he invents this 3x flop raise. 3x sounds like a thing, but like most raises, you should view them in terms of percent of pot. Like what odds does it cost you to make the raise? What odds does it lay your opponent? So yeah, it's a very small raise. And his hand does do it occasionally, but I mean, it's like 8%. And that's if that's the only sizing that he uses on the flop. In any event, for the times that he does raise this jack 10 off with the 10 of spades, he checks a turn. Pretty much always. Another like little 5% slice can find the bet that he does. Victor's hand never does anything except call. Yeah, Fedor kind of just puts himself in a confusing spot here. It's a little over half pot. Victor flats, and the interesting thing about this hand isn't those two straights, it's the river. Because Fedor is going to invent a bet size, and Victor is going to make a judgment about it. And hopefully we get the audio for that as well. I think it was kind of funny. The Fedor, I think it's around 20% pot, maybe like 22% pot, his river bet size. Victor's hand, he knows this for sure, is a pure call, and he's going to deviate from that.
Looks like a shocking bet, that's how we call it. Cash game streets.
One of the more notable hands of the match on the right hand table right now. Fedor off 150 BB. 3-bets the ace king offsuit. Victor's going to find a 4-bet with king 10 suited. Definitely not standard, but something that he's doing when they're a bit deeper, I guess. I'm assuming that he expects king jack and king queen offsuit to have to ditch some amount of the time, and that's one of the advantages of 4-betting this. Plus, it's a tough spot for his opponent to 5-bet. You do really, I mean, as far as I know, you just want to be jamming as a 5-bet. You don't want to be doing what Fedor's about to do here. But I'm not for sure about it, and obviously your opponent could do something like this, so you need to be ready for it. But yeah, you're not expecting to get 5-bets often off the stack depths, and I think that's why Victor can 4-bet this hand. Anyway, he does get 5-bet for about a third of effective stacks. And so he's in position, 5,300 more to call. I don't imagine this hand can get folded. He'll have to fold some shit. And an issue that I had trying to sim this hand is just I don't really know what range Fedor Holz is 5-betting this sizing. Like, sure, you can give him a bunch of his aces, but like, is he going to flat some still? Probably not. Is he going to jam some? I don't know. Like, how much is he jamming? You know, so it was tricky. I had to just guesstimate the range for him, and then, you know, just fold some hands of Victor's I thought would be folds and call the rest. Shove a bunch of his value, but mix some flats. Like, I imagine he would trap some amount of the aces to this, even though it's kind of crazy because his opponent is, you know, pretty pot committed, putting in a third of stacks. But he goes ahead and flops a flush. And Fedor, I think it's like a 14% sizing he's going to elect for on the flop. Yeah, so this is my guesstimated range for what that would look like. He's not really jamming the flop much, for those who thought maybe he's jamming at SPR a little bit less than 1. He goes ahead and makes a bet. Victor's hand's just trapping all day, same on the turn. The only curious thing really about this hand that people might not have noticed is that Fedor should just be checking the turn with his ace-king. But he's going to go ahead and barrel. And if you think about it, it's kind of a weird barrel. It's like when you bet 14% on the flop, you force your opponent to continue with some hands that, you know, you're ahead of by a decent amount with this ace of diamonds king. Now when the turn comes, this card, ace 5 gets there. Ace 4 gets there as well. It's just, are you value betting? Like the sizing that he chooses is like 20% pot or something. Are you value betting? Is that what it's less, it's like 17% pot, the sizing he chooses. Is that a value bet? Like, he coolers some hands, obviously, but is it not too thin? I don't know. In any event, my guesstimated range basically pure checks his hand. I think the times it bets it actually doesn't have a diamond. And yeah, Victor goes for a call. And Fedor, it's an interesting run out. Because he's gonna find a queen here. So like a lot of his bluffs get there on the river. And in my guesstimated sim, which may be far from accurate, he's just range jamming if he bets the turn. His entire range shoves the river. And he probably still doesn't have enough bluffs doing this after the queen rolls. But yeah, he's going to find a check. And the way that I believe he was explaining it in a post-match interview is he felt like Victor was actually quite polarized for the way that he continues, like going for a flat. Like maybe he thought that Victor would have to jam the flop or the turn if he had a pair, etc. And then he also said that he thought Victor would be snap checking back with jacks and tens. And I mean, I highly disagree with that. I think that if Victor finds himself with a pair here better than a 6, he's probably going to value shove it on the river after a check. He might make a check back thinking, oh, maybe Fedor just rivers a queen with like king queen or ace queen, doesn't know what to do on this board, and checks. But I think like you're free rolling yourself so hard to not value shove with a pair. And because Fedor is supposed to range jam the river, I don't know if he's supposed to call versus a bet because he's never supposed to check. And I just couldn't be fucking node locking the sim even further, you know, like it was already a piece of shit. But I imagine that if he's checked the river somehow with the hand that he has, he's snapping this off. But he goes ahead and folds. Some would say saving 12k. Selving 12k. But yeah, an interesting hand. Who fucking knows when you get clicked back this deep, awkward as fuck hand. Not a spot that any of us have really played much of, so... These are kind of the cool hands that you see in these fast-paced heads-up matches. I guess this wasn't overly fast-paced, but, you know, when the tables are flying, like when people used to 4-table and 6-table back in the day, there'd be pots like this, like, all over the shop. And yeah, both players really, I mean, it's hard to say if Victor knows the spot that well. Like, he's obviously been in a spot like this way more than almost anyone. Like, there'd be, like, you know, 10 people in the world that have played more pots like this, max. But yeah, Fedor definitely not really sure what he's doing here. I've got no idea what he should be doing here. It's just kind of a, I don't know, he put himself in a tough spot. He knew he could have just shoved it pre, but I guess he rolled something in the middle or low and decided, oh fuck, I don't know, do something else. And the turn barrel just got him in trouble. I think if he checked the turn, he wouldn't have found it too hard to play rivers. But after betting that weird sizing, it like really thins down Victor's range. Like Victor can't double float that very easily. So all the hands that Fedor has absolutely slammed just have to fold the turn. And then the queen, like a lot of his bluffs get there. I don't know, just a weird hand overall. Over on the right, Victor's 3-bet pre, c-bet flop, which he does about 3/4 of the time with this hand. And Fedor is going to continue here, ace-8 high. And it's hard to know exactly what he's thinking. Combos of ace-8 offsuit that continue only include the 8 of clubs. So he may be really onto something, like thinking that he blocks the old 8-6, 8-5 suited. And that's his reasoning. Or he could just decide, you know, I have 2 overs to the board, even though it's a larger c-bet, like I still have the backdoor straight draw, I turn an open-ender or a gut shot on a few cards. But he does peel. And once he peels, Victor pure gives this up on the turn. If he has diamonds, he can mix sizes. If he has any of the other suits, he checks them 100%. So he is going to find the check. And Fedor is going to go for a stab. And if he has ace-8 off with the ace of diamonds, his stab sizing is perfect and always does it. But without the ace of diamonds, like not blocking as many continues, he's supposed to like either check back or stab smaller. Works out from this time though. Okay, we've got a nice little hand on the left. Victor going to c-bet this jack 4. I think it's happening like 75-80% of the time, c-betting this hand. People might not c-bet these hands enough, honestly. This is like a true heads-up spot, I feel. Like you've got garbage. You know, it's not doing much for you. Like, how do you play your garbage? With the jack of hearts, because you block a decent amount of continues, you're actually pure barreling and you can mix the sizes. So he is overbetting a bit. Fedor, like these spots I feel like people under raise as the defending player out of position. like, you can understand in the moment it is hard to raise. It's kind of like Victor's King 8 from earlier. But if you never do it, I mean, that's also not good. So yeah, this is the real question of the hand. It's what should Victor do here? Like, he does have a very valuable blocker, but he also blocks some weaker hands like a Jack 7 of hearts. So yeah, tough one. I mean, he goes for a sizing that this hand shouldn't use. Like, you still do have a nut blocker. So you want to be going, like, the smaller size this uses is 150% pot. And this hand still finds a decent amount of jams, like 30% shove. So the game of Hold'em is alive and well. It's a good game. There's nothing as fun as just ramming the river for, like, what is it, 5 times the pot. But yeah, Victor goes smaller. And let's listen to what they say.
Maybe no.
I was surprised. Why? I thought you're gonna go for like 100 now.
I should have. I got distracted.
Especially with this hand. But
yeah,
you have the heart.
I had to. It's 100%. I just had like 2 other situations. I guess I was lucky I didn't.
Yeah, so that's funny. I mean, he said he was distracted, which obviously is understandable when you're playing like a 100k tournament and a couple of other things, plus 2 tables of heads up. It's not like he checked it back, you know. But yeah, instant regret. Fedor saying, well, Jack of Hearts, maybe you don't want to go so big. Kind of true, but kind of not. It does matter that it's a heart, but it doesn't really affect his strategy with the hand overall. Had he jammed, like he says that he feels better because, like, you know, he might have saved money. Had he jammed, Fedor was only finding something like 25% calls with 8-7 2 pair, because it is a 5x pot river shove. Our final hand of the evening over on the left hand table, Victor defending the Jack 5 double suited and flopping top pair against Fedor's over and a gut shot. Yeah, if you guys like this video, man, I'd appreciate if you guys share it or give it a like. Don't want to be that guy, but you know, it took me fucking 8 hours just to make it today, and I had to run sims all night to do it. So yeah, it's a bit of a process. It's kind of fun doing it. It's educational for me as well, because I get to learn a bit of heads up. But if you guys like it, just a little bit of effort would be cool. I'll leave it there. Fedor's going to barrel this turn. And this is actually a pretty standard bet. I was like, oh yeah, it's a bit thin, but no, it was a good bet, happening most of the time. And Victor, you might think, oh yeah, top 2 could raise. Could raise, not a very high frequency raise. And he's preferring to raise more with like 3 blockers and straights than anything else. And some of his sets that didn't raise the flop, like a pocket 5s, and some of his 4s. But yeah, goes and makes a standard check call. And now, if you were betting on Victor to win this session, you were really fucking hoping Fedor would value bet this river. And he definitely considers it. He definitely considers it, but it would have been a mistake. It's a pure check back. And he ends up making it. But yeah, if you had money on that, you would have been a little bit sad that he didn't fire the river, because he obviously was considering it. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Probably catch you guys on the next one. We shall see. We shall see how this video is received. Basically, if it's doing better than the last one, I'm probably keen. If it's doing worse, I don't know, man. It was a long fucking day. Speed this guy up, huh? Oh no, there he is. He checks it.
This is a whale of a move by Morant there.